Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about some real stuff, something I like most. I like to talk about mostly. It's a philosophy. All right. Okay. The subject or topic of today's talk is the progress, the true progress of philosophy is of ontology or its ontology. All right, think about this one. Why do you say the true progress of philosophy is of ontology? In other words, to my mind, no progress in philosophy can be made without advancement of ontology. Think about this. When uh, the late scientist, astronomer, and theoretical physicist Hawking, uh, Stephen Hawking, yeah, that's his name. Stephen Hawking died. Of course, he died. Uh, Before he died, he said, "The philosophy is dead. Now we depend on physics or astronomical physics to seek truth. So scientists now holding the flag of advancement for seeking truth, or something to that extent." Well, think about this. What he meant is because reason for almost a century or 70 years roughly since uh, since the late German philosopher uh, Heidegger died. Till now, basically, no advancement in philosophy is made, except some language related, like Derrida's deconstruction or language analysis, basically. Nothing else. I mean, nothing important ontologically. So, without ontologically development, philosophy cannot move forward. So he's saying philosophy is dead. Actually, as early as in Hegel's time, or later in Nietzsche's time, they all claim philosophy is dead. Why? Because they all think that there's nothing you can do about philosophy anymore. You cannot move the ontology forward. That's the problem. All right, let me briefly trace the history of philosophy from its early development till Heidegger's being. Basically, we can say this. In the ancient Greek time, or before Socrates, uh, all philosophers name one thing only for the truth of everything, of the world, of all the nature, heaven or earth, whatever it is, or surroundings. They say either it's water, like Phyllis, or like air, like something you cannot name it, or it's a fire, or it's a number, and they almost name something to indicate that's the basic element of the world. So something, some matter of existence is the key to everything else in later development. From this one, you can see people's thoughts at that time mostly focuses focused on one thing. It's the same thing happened in China as well. Yeah, right. It's before the we call it a warring states period, around the time 506 BC. Chinese developed something similar to this. We say 金木水火土, right? Okay, so the five things. It has a similar effect. Naming one thing or one thing only, that is the source of everything else. That's Greek thinking. In China, people think actually the fundamental or Tao or way is two things, yin and yang, and negative and positive. So, but anyway, trying to trace everything to the fewest possible element. One thing, mostly in Greek philosophy, that is the idea. All right. And the philosophy trend, it moved forward and progressed to Plato's time, and Plato thinks the form is everything else, right? So Plato's form, basically, that's a abstraction from the reality. And his student Aristotle thinks that reality is a fundamental thing for everything else we know. So Plato and Aristotle, they both move the ontology of philosophy forward. In this sense, they developed philosophy. All right, then we come another big step or big milestone is in the Middle Ages. We have the three most famous religious philosophers. That is Augustine. That is another two. One is let me think. What's his name? It's both in Britain, and the Thomas Aquinas, and the other is I suddenly forgot the name. But anyway, three of them. So they think that God is everything. God is the reality, right? They develop all sorts of theory to defend God. That is the case. Okay, so in that sense, philosophy still moves forward because God is one more thing as a source of everything else moving forward. Or from God, everything else sprung out, right? Okay, then we come to Descartes, right? Descartes is a French philosopher, is a father of modern philosophy. All right. To Descartes, the world basically had two substances, he called it. One is the matter, the other is the mind, which are totally different, according to Descartes. Okay. So that's moving forward also from God to two substances. One is the matter, one is the mind. Okay? And so this is moving forward again. So we can see the real development of philosophy from that point on. And after Descartes, we come to German philosophers. First, we have the big guy, it's Kant, right? Kant raised the possibility or the source he called noumena. That's something which is there, but you cannot know. You can experience, but that's the source of everything in this phenomenal world. He called it phenomenon. He's the first person to use that word, meaning reality, similar as Aristotle's substance or Descartes' substance. Okay, so from Kant, then we next have another, like a summit, sort of a summit, Hegel system. And for Hegel, spirit is everything. And he called it absolute spirit. But anyway, it's a spirit. Spirit moves from the potential logically existing to reality, then to the mind. Stop right there. Mind is the last stop. He called it spirit. He thinks this movement started from logic and moved to eventually to the mind. It's a logic again, but on a higher level. So this circle, but going up like a spinal sort of a circle, moving upward, eventually come to the top. That is the spirit. All right, but after that, after Hegel, later we have, of course, we have Heidegger. And Heidegger raised the possibility, raised a being as the only or sole substance or source of everything. You may ask, what's the difference between Heidegger's being and when the ancient guy, his name Parmenides, says being, but it's in Plato's work. What's the difference, you may say? Well, let's say this way. When Parmenides says being, he mostly means being is something of existing versus nothing. So, according to Parmenides, you have to start with something. That is, what is existed. That's his meaning. So, he is not on the same level as Parmenides, like the Heidegger's meaning of being. The difference is when Heidegger says being, Heidegger meant the pure existence, the only source, or the most basic, the most fundamental level of things, he called it being. But of course, Heidegger is still thinking from his consciousness, from his mind, right? From humans' view. It's sort of like epistemology from that side to talk about that. But in his plan, he really wanted to write it ontologically, using being as it is, not from the human mind. We know Dasein means from a person, from a human mind, right? But he failed. He didn't achieve the second book. He intended to write the second book about it, but later he forgot it. No, he didn't. He didn't succeed in that. So he didn't. He failed to do that, we should say. All right, then that's a basic story, the basic history for this series. I just use like 10 minutes to give you the brief look at each step. So the next one, the last one, I would say, is what I call it absolute. Why is absolute is the final culminating the climate of all else, preceding all the philosophy, moving ontology forward? Here's the point. First, what is absolutology? All right. In my definition, that's a word I made. That is study of the ontology of instantology. This part is a study of the absoluteness. All right. I call it absolute is absolutely absolute. So double A, you can say. So absolutology is a part of instantology in this sense. And why do you see that? It's a long story. Let me just do it one by one. All right. And so you may have the question. So what is the absolute anyway? How does the absolute move the ontology forward? Actually, here when we talk about the ontology, it's not philosopher in philosophy's sense of ontology, and this point needs some explanation. Otherwise, you won't see what I mean by that. But anyway, let me give you some uh, try to get this point clear. It's a little bit hard to say, but I'll try my best. First, what is absolute? Is absolute being? Is absolute being, as Heidegger talked about it? Well, absolute is not a being for sure. You know why? Because absolute is has nothing to do with being. Because being is something which exists. Or being is the relative part. It's just the opposite of absolute. So absolute is definitely not being. Rather, it's the opposite of being. Because being is a relative. All right, then you may say, how about nothing? Is absolute nothing? Well, the answer simply no. The reason is when we talk about nothing, we normally mean nothing is something. Think about this concept. If we don't have being, can we have the idea of nothing? So if you thought about that before, you probably will have the conclusion, no, that's not right. Any nothing is nothing of something. In other words, nothing is part of a being. It's a property of being, according to Hegel. Right? Hegel said that very clearly. So nothing out of the definition of being. When we say nothing, it's nothing of something. Something existing before. So without the being existing before, you don't have the idea of nothing. For example, if you say, I have nothing about money, right? I don't have money, I have nothing. Okay, so money existing before. If there's no definition of money, you don't have nothing of money. You don't have this concept. So make it clear. As Hegel says, nothing is part of a being. That's why when he flipped the coin, flipped the concept, being, nothing, they are the same. So Hegel is correct. All right, then how about this? How about nothingness? Let's generalize the idea of nothing. We say nothingness. Can we say nothingness? Well, you can, of course, like a being of existing. Being is more general of existence, right? You can say nothingness. But nothingness, this abstraction is also out of the concept of the collective being or collective existence. Making sense to you? Think about this. When you generalize it, when you get a collective noun, this collection must come out of being collectively also, or existence collectively, right? So in this sense, you cannot say nothingness is any more different from nothing. Nothing of something for individuality, you may say this way, and the nothingness is a collective noun or now of the collection of being or existence in this sense. So nothingness is still related to nothing, as nothing is related to being. But only the set is different. The concept of set, the mathematical concept of set is different. All right. So absolute is not nothingness. Then how about this? You may say, is absolute the silence? Well, you are close now. You are close to absolute. Absolute is silence. In other words, if you don't say anything, that's absolute. Or sort of close to absolute. But not quite, because a lot of things don't make a sound, don't make a recognition, right? Or animals or stones don't say anything. That's a silence. Is this silence close to absolute too? No, it is not. So, silence, you can say from a human's point of view, close to absolute, but still not absolute, not quite there. All right, let's go on. All right, how about absolute is non-speakable? Well, that's even closer. Absolute is non-speakable in the sense that whatever you say, it won't be absolute. The reason is when you say absolute, when you say something, you are making an impression, or you are making a being, or this act of speaking is being. Is that clear? So whatever you do is being, is the event, right? So event exists, so event is being. So even for non-speakable, it's still the event. In this sense, you still use the predicate is here. So absolute is not the predicate is in this sense. But it's closer. All right, let's go on. So then we come to the conclusion. What is absolute then? Well, let me say this. Absolute is represented by words or by language, by this limited relative. You have to say something about it to let other people know. If you don't say it, if you keep silence, nobody else will understand. Right? The truth has to be told, has to be exposed, and people's mind have to be enlightened in this sense. Otherwise, they are in the dark, in the cave, as Plato said. So this is the idea. The words, the sound, the vocabulary, the expression, whatever events we try to display here for the absolute is just a representation or imperfect representation, limited representation of the absolute. Just because if we don't do this way, we have no other way, no other tools to spread the truth, to tell the truth, to let other people know. The only mean we have at our disposal is the language. Nothing else we can do about it. You can draw a picture, you can play a music, you can act, use your body language, but that's not as close as language, as a tool to spread the truth, to reveal the truth of the absolute. All right, as the last example, let me give you analogy. See if this is easier for you to understand. Everybody is born into this world, correct? All right. Have you ever thought about this? You have thoughts when you grow up or when you were little. You have thoughts in your mind, correct? And also, all thoughts are plural in form. In other words, you have this thought, that thoughts, and you have all sort of thoughts. When you arrange your thoughts systematically, you write a book. That's called a theory. You have a theory. It can be economics, it can be military, it can be marketing, it can be philosophy. Anything you want. That's a collection of thoughts. Right? Okay. Now I'm going to ask you this question. Have you ever thought about that? How did you get your first thought? Think about this. How can you or could your brain produce thoughts or a thought from what? From another thought? As later you have one thought sprung up, several other thoughts. Let's say I'm thinking about making a car. Then I have other thoughts how to better it, how to make it cheaper, more efficient. All right? All later thoughts were from the previous thoughts. All right, so here the problem is, what about the first one? How did you get the first thought? Is this thought, the first thought, comes from where? From nothing? From your brain? It's your brain's function, of course. But what is that? I call it absolute. So in other words, in absolutology, your brain is a part or localized absolute. It's a part of the universal absolute, or whatever you call it. All this unspeakable, unrepresentable idea of absolute. It's just a localized part in your brain. Actually, it combined with the relative thing in your brain. So, when you were born, you produced, later of course, you have to grow, and your brain started to have the first thought from the absolute. This thought, as soon as it is produced, is relative, because it's a unit. It's a one thought. It's a countable one. So it becomes relative. Just as our world, the whole world, the Big Bang, in physical terms, how comes, sprung, explode into being after Big Bang? It's the same thing. So in other words, your brain has an explosion, the Big Bang. So you have thought. You started to have thoughts. The first one comes from the absolute. This absolute in your brain is the same in nature, in essence, with the real, absolutely absolute. They are the same thing. All right? Think about that. That's a key, the crucial element of absolutology. If you understand this point, and you really get the most important, the core of absolutology. The other part is instantology that deals with the relative. All right, that's the next topic. All right, thank you for listening.